Chapter 2. Political Ideologies. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we turn to one of the most important building blocks in political science, political ideologies. If Chapter 1 gave us the vocabulary of politics, this chapter introduces us to the big stories, the systems of thought that give politics its meaning and direction. So, what exactly is an ideology? In everyday conversation, the word ideology often carries a negative tone. We hear people say someone is too ideological, as if it means being extreme, rigid, or unrealistic. But in political science, ideology is not an insult. Instead, it refers to a coherent system of beliefs and ideas that provides a framework for understanding society, politics, and human nature. Ideologies give us lenses to interpret the world, to decide what is right and wrong, and to envision what kind of future we want. Let's begin with the three major ideologies of the modern era: Liberalism, Conservatism, and Socialism. Liberalism has its roots in thinkers like John Locke and Adam Smith. Locke emphasized natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and argued that governments exist only with the consent of the governed. Smith, on the economic side, promoted free markets and competition as engines of prosperity. Taken together, liberalism emphasizes individual freedom, constitutional government, democracy, and economic liberty. But liberalism itself is not monolithic. Classical liberals stress limited government and maximum individual freedom, while modern liberals argue that government must play a role in ensuring equality of opportunity. Libertarians, another branch, push for minimal state involvement in both economic and social life. When we talk about liberalism, we're really talking about one of the most influential traditions in modern political thought. Its roots stretch back to the Enlightenment, when thinkers began to challenge the old authority of kings and churches. Two figures in particular stand at the foundation: John Locke and Adam Smith. Locke, writing in the 17th century, argued that all people are born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. For him, government was not sacred or divinely appointed. It existed only because people agreed to it, and its sole purpose was to protect those rights. If a government failed to do so, citizens had the right to resist it, even to overthrow it. You can hear Locke's influence echoing in Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, with its talk of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Classical liberals, for instance, argue that government should be as limited as possible. The less interference in people's lives, the more room there is for liberty to flourish. They see government primarily as a guardian of rights and a referee for markets, nothing more. Modern liberals, however, see things differently. They argue that freedom is meaningless without the resources to use it. In their view, government has a responsibility to ensure equality of opportunity by providing public education, protecting workers, and offering social safety nets. This is the tradition that gave rise to programs like Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal in the United States, or the welfare states across Europe. And then there are libertarians who take the classical liberal suspicion of government even further. They argue that the state should interfere as little as possible, not just in the economy but also in personal life. Whether it's business regulations, marriage laws, or drug policy, libertarians insist that individuals should be left free to make their own choices, so long as they don't harm others. So liberalism, in the broadest sense, is about freedom. But the real debate, the one we still wrestle with today, is about what kind of freedom and how much government is needed to protect it. Is freedom best preserved when the state steps back, or does real freedom require the state to step in and ensure everyone has a fair chance? On the economic side, Adam Smith, in the 18th century, offered a powerful vision of how society could prosper. In The Wealth of Nations, he described the way markets, left free from heavy government interference, could organize themselves through competition and self-interest. His famous idea of the invisible hand suggested that when individuals pursue their own good, they often end up contributing to the good of the whole. Taken together, Locke and Smith gave us the pillars of liberalism: individual freedom, constitutional government, democracy, and economic liberty. But from the very beginning, liberalism has never been a single uniform doctrine. It branches into different interpretations about how much government should do and where the line between freedom and equality ought to be drawn. Now, contrast this with conservatism. Conservatism developed in reaction to the Enlightenment and revolutionary upheavals. Where liberals saw progress and human reason, conservatives like Edmund Burke saw danger in rapid change. Conservatism emphasizes tradition, social order, and stability. It values community and hierarchy, warning that tearing down long-standing institutions can bring chaos. In the American context, conservatism evolved into two streams: one that accepts constitutional democracy but stresses limited government and traditional values, and another that is more authoritarian, emphasizing authority and discipline. The third major tradition is socialism, which emerged in the 19th century as a critique of industrial capitalism. Early socialists, and later Karl Marx, saw capitalism as exploitative, enriching a few while oppressing the many. Socialism calls for greater equality, redistribution of wealth, and public ownership of key industries. But like liberalism, socialism takes different forms. Revolutionary socialists sought to overthrow capitalism entirely, while democratic socialists advocated reform through elections and policy. Today, social democracy blends socialism's concern for equality with capitalism's efficiency, producing welfare states in much of Europe. When we turn to socialism, we're looking at a tradition that emerged in the 19th century as a powerful critique of industrial capitalism. The Industrial Revolution created enormous wealth, but it also produced enormous inequality. Factory owners and industrialists became rich, while the workers who fueled that prosperity often lived in poverty, worked long hours in dangerous conditions, and had little say in their own futures. Out of this world of exploitation, early socialists began to ask, is this really freedom? Is this really progress? Now, just as with liberalism, socialism is not one size fits all. It has taken many forms. Revolutionary socialists, inspired by Marx, sought to abolish capitalism entirely through uprisings. The most famous example is the Russian Revolution of 1917, which gave rise to the Soviet Union. These movements often aimed for a classless society, but in practice sometimes produced authoritarian regimes. On the other hand, democratic socialists argued for change within the system. They believed capitalism could be transformed through elections, laws, and public policies rather than violent revolution. In the 20th century, you see this in movements like the British Labour Party, which pushed for nationalizing industries and expanding welfare through parliamentary democracy. And then there's social democracy, the form most visible today in much of Europe. Social democracy doesn't try to abolish capitalism. Instead, it blends the efficiency of markets with the fairness of socialist principles. Countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Germany are strong examples. They maintain vibrant capitalist economies, but also provide universal healthcare, free or affordable education, pensions, unemployment protections, and high levels of taxation to support these services. The goal is not to eliminate wealth, but to ensure everyone has security and opportunity. Socialism, in its many forms, continues to shape political debates. In the United States, calls for universal health care or free college tuition eco-socialist ideals, even if they're not framed as socialism in the traditional sense. Figures like Bernie Sanders describe themselves as democratic socialists, pushing for policies that reduce inequality while keeping democratic institutions intact. Of course, socialism also has its critics. Opponents argue that too much government control can slow innovation, discourage entrepreneurship, or limit personal freedoms. Supporters counter that without checks on capitalism, inequality grows unchecked, creating societies where wealth and opportunity are reserved for the few. So when we look at socialism, we see more than a theory. We see a living tradition that has taken different shapes: revolution, reform, and welfare state compromise. At its heart, it continues to ask a question that remains as urgent today as it was in the 19th century. How do we balance prosperity with equality, and how do we ensure that progress truly serves the many, not just the few? One of the most influential voices here was Karl Marx, writing with Friedrich Engels. Marx argued that capitalism was fundamentally unfair. The system, he said, was designed to benefit a small group, the bourgeoisie, or owners of capital, while the vast majority, the proletariat, did the work, but reaped few of the rewards. In his view, capitalism carried the seeds of its own destruction because its inequalities would eventually drive workers to rise up and create a new system. Socialism. At its core, socialism emphasizes greater equality. It calls for redistributing wealth, ensuring that the gap between rich and poor does not become too wide. It also stresses public or collective ownership of key industries. Not every corner store or small business, but things like transportation networks, energy systems, or healthcare, which affect everyone. And socialism insists on protecting citizens through social welfare, programs that guard against poverty, unemployment, or ill health. When we move beyond the big three traditions of liberalism, conservatism, and socialism, we encounter several smaller but still highly influential ideologies. Each one pushes us to rethink politics in a different direction. Take anarchism, for example. While most ideologies debate what kind of government we should have, anarchists ask a more radical question: do we need government at all? They envision societies organized through voluntary cooperation, mutual aid, and small decentralized communities. Thinkers like Mikhail Bakunin and Pierre-Joseph Proudhon laid the foundations in the 19th century, and while anarchism has rarely been realized on a national scale, it has inspired powerful grassroots movements from early labor unions to modern anti-globalization protests. At its core, anarchism challenges us to think about what true freedom might look like without centralized authority. Then there's nationalism. This ideology ties identity and loyalty to the nation, to a shared sense of language, culture, or history. Nationalism has played two very different roles in history. On one hand, it has been a unifying force. In the 19th century, it helped bring together fragmented states like Germany and Italy, and in the 20th century, it fueled anti-colonial struggles from India to Africa, where people rallied around the dream of national independence. But nationalism has also shown its darker side, excluding minorities and turning hostile toward outsiders. In its extreme form, it can become authoritarian and xenophobic, placing loyalty to the nation above democracy or human rights. We see both sides of nationalism still with us today, in debates about immigration, sovereignty, and globalization. Fascism represents one of the most destructive turns nationalism has ever taken. In the 20th century, it arose as an ultranationalist authoritarian rejection of both liberal democracy and socialism. Fascist regimes like Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Nazi Germany built cults of leadership, glorified violence, suppressed dissent, and placed the nation, or the race, above everything else. The result was catastrophic: devastating wars, genocide, and the dismantling of democratic institutions. Fascism's defeat in World War II stands as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked authoritarianism, though echoes of fascist ideas still surface in extremist movements today. On a very different note, feminism challenges the patriarchal structures that have long dominated politics and society. Feminism insists on gender equality, not only in law but in culture, economics, and everyday life. It has come in waves. The first focused on women's suffrage, the second expanded into workplace rights and reproductive freedom, and later waves emphasized diversity and intersectionality, recognizing that women's experiences differ across race, class, and sexuality. Feminism has reshaped our world, from voting rights to laws against discrimination to ongoing debates about representation in politics and business. Finally, we arrive at the Green Movement, one of the defining ideologies of our own century. At its heart, green politics argues that our relationship to the planet must take center stage. Issues like climate change, renewable energy, conservation, and environmental justice are not just scientific problems, but political ones. Green parties in Europe have gained power by pushing sustainability, while movements like Fridays for Future, led by young activists, remind us that future generations will inherit the consequences of today's choices. Unlike older ideologies, which often assume that economic growth is always good, the Green Movement challenges us to recognize the limits of growth and to prioritize the health of our ecosystems. So, while these ideologies may be called minor compared to liberalism, conservatism, or socialism, they are anything but insignificant. Anarchism forces us to question authority. Nationalism binds communities together but can also divide them. Fascism warns us of the dangers of power unchecked. Feminism insists on equality and inclusivity, and the Green Movement demands that we reckon with our responsibilities to the earth itself. Together, they expand our understanding of what politics can mean and what values should guide us in building a just and sustainable society. In conclusion, political ideologies are more than labels. They are maps of meaning, guiding us through the complex terrain of politics. They give people narratives about the past, visions of the future, and justifications for the present. As we continue this course, remember that when we study elections, policies, or institutions, we are also studying the ideologies that animate them. Next time, we will dive into Chapter 3, where we look specifically at American political culture, the values and beliefs that make the U.S. unique. So why study ideologies? Because they matter. They help us understand why people support certain policies, why parties form platforms, and why revolutions ignite. Ideologies shape how leaders govern, how citizens vote, and how societies imagine justice. They are not relics of the past. They are alive in every political debate today, from climate change to healthcare to questions of identity. Think about this. When politicians argue over whether healthcare is a right or a privilege, that's not just about budgets. It's about competing ideologies. When one side emphasizes freedom from government interference and another emphasizes equality of access, they're drawing from liberal and socialist traditions. Even debates over national identity, who belongs, who gets to vote, who we are as a people, are steeped in nationalism, liberalism, and conservatism.